moving toward instead of away from thoughts in the mind. So when we're engaging thoughts, whether we realize it or not, we are holding them at a distance. In fact, if there's no distance or polarity in consciousness, which is the space in which thoughts form, then thinking stops. So if there's no distance in thoughts, no polarity, no pushing and pulling on the thought substance, which is called consciousness, then there's just a sort of neutrality. There's just that pure sense of knowing or knowingness that does not need an object to be self-aware or to be purely aware or purely conscious without content. So how does this work? Well, it happens in steps. And the first step is to realize we are not our thoughts. How do you realize that? Recognize any thought in the immediate. Whatever the thought is saying in this moment, we just recognize it as such. We recognize that there's a thought here, and its content says XYZ. That content can be anything. It can be, my mom wasn't nice to me today, or my car broke down, what am I going to do about it? Or, boy, I'm feeling really happy right now, or I'm feeling at peace. Whatever the thought says, just notice it. Oh, that's a thought. And then notice there is something that's aware of that thought. The moment you become aware of it, then there's something you're taking yourself to be that is not that thought. Because the thought seems to point back to you or define you. So forget about any labels of what that is, whether it's a you or a non-you or awareness or consciousness, and just notice that phenomenon. The moment you become aware of a thought, then you aren't that thought. And when you become aware of that, you'll also notice that there's awareness that is something like the center of what you are as the aware one. This works with other objects of awareness as well, like sound. If you hear a sound, do you notice there's something that seems to be aware of that sound? Like that. There's some knowingness at the center of your experience. So when it comes to thoughts, that knowingness of thoughts cannot be defined by the thought. Certainly. Because one thought might say, I'm happy. And then a few minutes later, another thought could say, I'm not happy. Clearly, those don't define you because they change. They come and go. Thoughts just seem to come out of nowhere and disappear back into nowhere. And yet, you as the knowingness didn't disappear and come back. You're right here. You're always right here. So that's the first step, is de-identifying from thoughts, or recognizing a thought as a thought. The second step is to recognize that if you've become aware of a thought in this way, then there has to be some space or distance, at least energetically in the experience. It would be like standing back and pointing at objects going, that's a baseball, that's a car, that's a cloud, that's a tree. There's a space between. There's the one pointing, and then there's the object. Well, with de-identifying from thoughts, it starts out that way. There's the one that's aware of, or the conscious one, or the knowingness, and the thought as a seeming object. Oh, I know that that thought is saying XYZ. But I don't need that thought to be there for me to be here as the knowingness. Yeah? So that's the second step, to realize there's a bit of distance when we de-identify. Now the third step is to close that distance, which can be tricky. It can be tricky because we're so identified with thoughts that we have to sort of take an artificial action to de-identify. We have to stand apart and notice a thought as a thought. which is a bit of an artificial thing to do. It's a practice. But here's the thing. Once we de-identify from the thoughts, we have an opportunity to recognize the nature of the thought stuff, what the thought's actually made of, experientially, not intellectually. When we go from step 2 to 3, we're not in the realm of intellectual anymore. We're not trying to cognize or understand or model this. Because if we are, we're just going back into identification. We're just going back down the thought stream, which means you're going back before step 2 to being mind identified again. So instead, the quality of our investigation changes from being willing to recognize the content of a thought, like the story it tells, the words, the concepts that are implicit in the thought, to an experience of direct contact, seeing that the knowingness that became aware of the thought is also what that thought is made out of, experientially. And to do this, it's sort of a moving closer experience internally, or as if we're feeling our way from the knowingness outward toward whatever seemed to be the formation of that thought. You just follow it really carefully, meaning don't jump to another thought. Don't start making thoughts, but just notice that the knowingness, the sense of I or I am, has sort of an outgrowth into what we were taking to be a thought. Actually, before step 2, we were taking it to be an actuality in the world. That wasn't a thought. That really was my mother, or my dog, or my car, or the past or the future. But once we've de-identified, now it's just a thought. It's thought stuff. So what we were taking to be an external reality, now we're taking to be an internal phenomenon that can tell a story. And then step 3 is seeing, feeling, intuiting that which is aware of this, that which is conscious of itself being conscious and requiring nothing else but that, also includes the movement of consciousness that seemed to form that thought structure. Can you feel into this? Once you do, you can do this in a mechanistically intuitive way. You don't have to conceptualize it all. You can stay in the feel of unbound consciousness, of I, of knowingness, and just follow it out to the thought forms as they begin to form, but we never identify with them because we don't lose contact with this knowingness. Give that a shot.